It was a tribute to my father at 56 Hope Road, the Bob Marley Museum. And I was trying to get through the gate. And one of the security guys saw me trying to come through and started to clear the way for me. And he was like, make space, Gang Junior coming, Gang.
Every family that carries a legendary name learns to live with two things at once: the privilege of the name and the endless public appetite for stories about it. Few families know that tension better than the Marleys. Bob Marley died in 1980, one having fathered 11 children, 9 of them biological, with several different women. Out of that large and complicated family tree, one son has spent the last 3 decades building an artistic identity that is unmistakably his own, while never escaping the shadow of his father's face on t-shirts, murals, and album covers around the world. That son is Damian Jr. Gong Marley, the youngest of Bob's children, and this is the real story of how he got here. His upbringing, his career, his brothers, and the genuine, well-documented tension that surrounded the 2024 biopic Bob Marley, One Love, a story that has since been buried under an avalanche of fabricated DNA test gossip videos that have nothing to do with the facts. Damian Marley was born in 1978, the son of Bob Marley and Cindy Breakspear, a Jamaican model who had been crowned Miss World in 1976. Bob died of melanoma in 1981, when Damian was only 2 years old, which means Damian never really knew his father as a living presence, only as a memory reconstructed through family stories, old recordings, and the enormous cultural footprint Bob left behind. That absence shaped him in a specific way. Unlike his older brothers, who had at least some direct childhood memories of their father, Damian grew up piecing together who Bob Marley was from second-hand accounts and from a public image that had already begun hardening into myth. He was raised in Stony Hill, an affluent, hillside neighborhood above Kingston, in a household quite different from the Trenchtown tenement yard where his father had come of age. Cindy Breakspear later married Tom Tavares Vinson, a prominent Jamaican criminal defense attorney and politician, and Damian grew up alongside 2 younger half-siblings from that marriage. He has spoken candidly in interviews about the strangeness of that setup. In a household where his stepfather and younger siblings were white Jamaicans, he was the only member of the immediate household with brown skin, and the only one carrying the surname and legacy of a father who had spent his life singing about black identity, Rastafari, and resistance to the very kind of establishment power his stepfather represented as a lawyer and politician. Growing up inside that contradiction gave him an unusually early, unusually personal understanding of class and color dynamics in Jamaica, the kind of lived contradiction that shows up again and again in his lyrics. His mother's home in Stony Hill also placed him among Kingston's middle and upper classes, which meant Damian's early ambitions weren't necessarily musical. By his own account, before committing to music, he had considered training as an architect. That's an important detail often left out of the more breathless retellings of his story. Damian Marley didn't start out assuming he would become a reggae artist just because of his last name. Nothing about his father's death when he was a toddler guaranteed that path. He found his way to the family business gradually, through his teenage years, rather than being born into an inevitable script. As a teenager, Damian embraced Rastafari, the same faith and cultural movement his father had helped popularize globally. He's described the philosophy as one built around unity and connection, a belief system meant to draw people together rather than divide them, even as it carries its own sharp critiques of Babylon, the Rastafari term for oppressive, materialistic power structures, a term that, growing up, applied uncomfortably close to home given his stepfather's profession. At around 13, Damian formed a group called the Shepherds along with the daughter of veteran reggae singer Freddie McGregor and the son of Cat Core from the band Third World, Reggae Royalty forming their own junior reggae royalty, in effect. The group performed at Reggae Sunsplash in 1992, but dissolved not long after, pushing Damian toward a solo path instead. With backing from Tough Gong, the record label his father had founded, Damian released his debut album, Mr. Marley, in 1996. It surprised a lot of listeners because rather than singing in the melodic style associated with his father and his older brother Ziggy's band, the Melody Makers, Damian leaned into DJing, the rapid, rhythmic vocal delivery associated with dancehall, a stylistic choice that immediately set him apart from the rest of the family's musical output. His second album, Halfway Tree, released in 2001, marked his real creative breakthrough. The title referred to a real, well-known landmark in Kingston, the busy commercial district of Halfway Tree, marked by its old clock tower, but it also worked as a personal metaphor. Damian has explained the title as a nod to his own position between his mother's more privileged upbringing and his father's roots in a poorer part of Kingston, a man standing halfway between 2 different Jamaicas. Halfway Tree won the Grammy Award for Best Reggae Album in 2002, co-produced with his older half-brother Damian Marley, who would go on to be a close, consistent collaborator throughout Damian's career. Damian's true global breakout came with his 2005 album, Welcome to Jamrock. The title track, built over a rhythm originally created decades earlier by the production duo Sly and Robbie for artist Ini Kamoze, became a massive crossover hit. Its lyrics confronted poverty, political corruption, and violent crime in Jamaica head-on, and the song stirred real controversy at home for what some saw as an unflattering portrait of the island, even as international audiences and critics praised its unflinching honesty. Jamaican academic Dr. Clinton Hutton, a professor at the University of the West Indies, was among those who publicly defended the song's value, describing it as a work that used the image of the inner city, its despair, its prejudice, but also its resilience and creative fire, to force listeners to reckon with real conditions rather than look away. Welcome to Jamrock reached number 13 on the UK singles chart and cracked the top 60 of the US Billboard. The album eventually went gold in the United States after selling 500,000 copies. At the 2006 Grammy Awards, Damian won both Best Reggae Album and Best Urban/Alternative Performance in a single night, making him the first Jamaican reggae artist ever to win 2 Grammys in one ceremony, and to this day the only reggae artist to have won in that particular Urban/Alternative Performance category. The album's other singles, including Road to Zion featuring Nas, planted the seed for what would become one of the most significant collaborations of Damian's career. That partnership with Nas deepened into a full joint album, Distant Relatives, released in 2010. The title captured the album's central idea, a shared African ancestry connecting a Jamaican reggae artist and an American hip-hop artist who, on the surface, came from very different musical worlds. Co-produced largely by Damian and Damian Marley, the album blended reggae rhythms with Nas's lyrical style and used African musical samples throughout, with lyrics addressing African history, poverty, and the parallel struggles of black communities in the United States and across the African continent. Proceeds from the project were directed toward funding school construction in the Congo. Commercially, Distant Relatives debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, selling around 57,000 copies in its first week, Nas's 10th top 10 album and Damian's second. It topped Billboard's R&B/hip-hop, rap, and reggae albums charts simultaneously and charted internationally as well, landing in the top 40 in the UK and cracking the top 10 albums chart in Canada. The lead single, As We Enter, performed respectably on both hip-hop and general iTunes charts in the US and UK. The album's themes and commercial success reinforced something that had become clear by this point in Damian's career. He wasn't simply trading on his father's name. He had built genuine credibility as a genre-crossing artist capable of collaborating comfortably with major names in hip-hop, something his father's generation of reggae artists rarely had the opportunity to do at this scale. In 2011, Damian became part of one of the more unusual musical experiments of his career. Super Heavy, a supergroup formed alongside Rolling Stones frontman Mick Jagger, musician and producer Dave Stewart, Indian composer A.R. Rahman, and British singer Joss Stone. The idea originated with Stewart, who had been living part-time in Jamaica and wanted to build a project blending Jamaican sounds with Indian orchestral influences, eventually bringing in Jagger, and then Rahman to realize that vision. The band recorded roughly 35 hours of material for their self-titled debut album, and their lead single, Miracle Worker, featuring Damian, Jagger, and Stone, charted in the UK. A second single, Satyami Vijayada, composed by Rahman with Jagger singing in Sanskrit, was timed for release around India's Independence Day and rolled out across major Indian cities with local media promotion. It was a strange, ambitious detour for Damian, and it demonstrated a willingness to work well outside the boundaries of reggae, dancehall, or hip-hop. In 2012, Damian teamed up with American electronic producer Skrillex on the track Make It Bun Dem, which also appeared in the video game Far Cry 3 that same year. The collaboration became a platinum single, something Bob Marley and the Wailers, for all their global influence, never achieved in the U.S. It's a detail that speaks less to any rivalry with his father's legacy and more to how much the commercial landscape for reggae-adjacent music has changed since Bob's era, along with Damian's specific talent for finding collaborators in unexpected corners of popular music. Damian released his 4th studio album, Stony Hill, named after the neighborhood where he grew up, in July 2017, preceded by the single Nail Pawn Cross the year before. The album won the Grammy for Best Reggae Album at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards, his 3rd Grammy win overall. Damian has spoken about resisting rigid genre boundaries in his music, describing his sound as a blend of dancehall and reggae rather than treating them as separate categories, arguing that both are simply parts of the same broader Jamaican culture. Across his career, one persistent narrative thread in tabloid coverage of the Marley family has been the suggestion of sibling rivalry or resentment, usually framed around comparisons between Damian and his older brother Ziggy, the founder of the Melody Makers and most publicly visible of Bob's children throughout the 1980s and 90s. The reality, based on decades of interviews, public appearances, and joint projects, tells a different story, one of ongoing, working collaboration. The clearest recent evidence of that came in 2025, when 5 of Bob's musical sons, Ziggy, Stephen, Damian, Kymani, and Julian, reunited for the Legacy Tour, their first joint touring outing together in roughly 2 decades. Timed around what would have been Bob Marley's 80th birthday, the 22-date North American tour saw the brothers, who collectively hold 22 Grammy Awards among them, share the stage and trade verses across a set list built from their father's catalog, as well as their own individual hits. At a show at the North Island Credit Union Amphitheater in Chula Vista, California, the brothers opened with a video tribute to their father before rotating lead vocals across songs like Get Up, Stand Up, Iron Lion Zion, Exodus, and One Love, while each brother also got dedicated solo segments to perform his own material, Julian's Boom Draw, Kymani's New Heights, Ziggy's Shalom Salam, and Melancholy Mood, and Damian's Medication, and Me Name Junior Gong, among others. That kind of coordinated, good-natured stage sharing is difficult to reconcile with any narrative of a genuine, ongoing feud between the brothers. Where there was real, documented tension, not fabricated, but also considerably less dramatic than online clickbait has made it sound, was around the 2024 biopic Bob Marley, One Love. Directed by Reynaldo Marcus Green, best known for King Richard, the film starred British actor Kingsley Ben-Adir as Bob and Lashana Lynch as Rita Marley. It premiered on Valentine's Day 2024 and posted a strong opening weekend, ultimately grossing around $51 million domestically and setting a record for the biggest Valentine's Day box office debut in the U.S. at that time. The commercial success came alongside a much rockier critical reception. Reviewers were split, with several outlets, Rotten Tomatoes prominently among them, giving the film comparatively low scores and criticizing it for what some called a reverential, sanitized approach to Bob's life, skipping over harder edges of his personal story in favor of hagiography. A CBC News piece on the film's reception captured this tension directly, framing the film as a labor of love for producer Ziggy Marley that nonetheless drew a wave of critical pushback for prioritizing myth-building over unflinching biography. 3 specific points of controversy stood out among Jamaican audiences and reggae media, and all 3 are well documented in outlets like Dancehall Mag and Urban Islands, rather than invented. First, casting. None of Bob's own sons auditioned for the role of playing their father on screen, and the producers, among them Ziggy and his sister Sedella Marley, ultimately selected Ben-Adir, a British actor with no Jamaican heritage, after being impressed by his audition. Some critics and fans felt strongly that a Jamaican actor, or possibly one of the Marley sons themselves, should have been given the role, arguing that authenticity mattered more in this case than in a typical biopic given the cultural weight the Marley story carries in Jamaica specifically. Second, the treatment of Cindy Breakspear, Damian's mother, in the finished film. Breakspear's relationship with Bob, and by extension her son Damian's very existence within the family story, was largely left out of the final cut. That omission didn't sit well with a segment of fans and commentators, some of whom saw it as the film choosing to center Bob's wife, Rita Marley, as the sole significant romantic figure in his life, while minimizing the mother of one of his most successful children. Coverage from Dancehall Mag around the film's release also noted a public moment where Ziggy publicly honored his own mother, Rita, with warm tributes shortly after the Breakspear controversy flared up online, something some observers read as at least an implicit response to the criticism, even if Ziggy himself never framed it that way. Third, and most directly connected to persistent feud rumors, Damian Marley did not attend any of the film's premieres, in Jamaica or internationally, and did not promote the movie on his own social media accounts, in noticeable contrast to how visibly some of his brothers supported the release. Combined with the Cindy Breakspear omission, that absence was enough to fuel real speculation in entertainment media that Damian and Ziggy, one of the film's executive producers, were at odds. Ziggy Marley addressed those rumors directly and